destination is the stars.
Hello, I'm Geoff Habinger, one half of the dynamic writing duo Habinger Kissee Authors. My co-author, Coy Kissee, and I have a new book coming out in March. The book is called Untouchable, and is the second book in our Saul and Bierowitz Vampire and Gangster trilogy. I'd like to read a short excerpt from Untouchable. It had been a week after my death that Ness had taken me to see Christian. He'd just gotten out of the hospital himself and was resting at his apartment. Ness, wearing a light brown overcoat and a brown fedora, knocked on Christian's door while I stood to the side, just out of sight. Christian opened the door, a bandage still covering the left side of his head where Capone's bullet had grazed him. "What can I do for you?" he asked. Ness pulled out a leather billfold and showed Christian his badge and Treasury Department ID. "I'm Elliot Ness, with the Treasury Department. I'd like to talk to you about transferring from the Bureau over to Treasury. May we come inside to discuss it?" Ness stepped aside so that Christian could see me. His eyes widened, and his face grew as pale as the bandage on his head. His right hand disappeared as he reached for something on the wall by his door, then quickly reappeared, holding a large wooden cross. "Begone, foul monster!" His voice was shrill as he took a step into the hall. "I am God's instrument, and I banish you from this place." I stared at Christian for a moment. He's definitely not the same guy who apologized to me for Agent Truesdale's behavior and left me thank you notes anymore. He stepped toward me, thrusting the cross into my face. Annoyed, I grabbed for the cross, but Christian pulled it away. "Stop that," I said. "It's annoying. Why didn't you flee from me? You should be cowering from the Holy Cross." "Maybe it's because I'm Jewish," I shrugged. Ness put an arm around his shoulders and guided Christian back into his apartment. I tried to follow, but found that I wasn't able to pass through the doorway. It was as though a powerful hand was pushing against my chest. I vaguely recalled Al Capone asking me if he could be invited into my apartment on the one time that he had paid me a visit. Ironically, he was the only one who had ever asked. "Agent Wright," I called, trying to sound as polite as I possibly could. "May I come in, please?" Christian paused, looking like he would just flat out refuse. If he could keep me out of his apartment in this way, I don't know that I would blame him. Ness gave him a light squeeze on his neck and said, "It's all right, Christian. Saul works for me." "Fine," Christian said, with a resigned sigh. "You can come in." As far as a friendly, welcoming greeting, it wasn't much, but the pressure on my chest disappeared, and I was able to enter the apartment. I closed the door behind me and followed Ness and Christian into his small living room. The space was neatly decorated, with a couch and a couple of armchairs. A Bible lay open on a small coffee table, and there was a radio against one of the walls, currently tuned to a news broadcast on WGN. The walls had framed pictures of Christian and his family, I supposed, parents and brothers from the looks of them. There was also a framed picture of Jesus at the Last Supper, with another cross above it, and a photo of a young boy, Christian, I assumed, wearing an altar boy's vestment. Christian turned the radio off and sat in one of the armchairs. Ness sat in the other chair, and I chose to stand in the doorway. Christian stared at me. "Agent Wright," Ness said, getting Christian's attention, "I hope that I can convince you to come work for me." Christian returned his gaze to me and rubbed his hand across the beard stubble on his chin. "Actually, I was thinking about retiring from government service altogether. I'm building a special group, a task force, to take down Al Capone." At the mention of Capone, Christian turned his gaze back to Ness. "President-elect Hoover has made taking Capone down a top priority for the government." "Good. Capone and all of these gangsters need to be taken care of." "So, you'll come and work for me?" asked Ness. Christian looked at me again. "Will I have to work with it?" He nodded his head toward me as he said the last word, scowling as he did. "I'm right here, you know," I grumbled. "What happened to you? You were really nice to me last week." "Last week I had a partner," Christian spat back, "and you were just a regular idiot, not the creature you've apparently become." That gave me pause, as I hadn't realized how close he and Truesdale must have been. I started to apologize, but Ness glanced uncomfortably at me and then back to Christian before saying, "Yes, you'd be working alongside Saul." "Then my answer is no. I appreciate your offer, but I'd like you to please leave now and take that thing with you." "Agent Wright, please reconsider," Ness said. He wasn't pleading, as if he'd expected to be turned down the first time that he had asked. "After the events of last week, I made some inquiries. It took some digging, and I had to promise a few favors to folks in the Bureau, but I managed to learn a few things. Ness sat back in the armchair and crossed one leg over the other, his ankle resting lightly across his knee. Back around the start of the Civil War, a special group was created within the United States government. It was started by Alan Pinkerton, but President Lincoln quickly brought it fully under government control. It was called the Night Watchers, and, for a time, the group was run by the Secret Service before being transferred to the Bureau of Investigations. Christian was looking toward Ness, but he slouched in his chair and was idly picking at some lint on the upholstery. I was fixated on Ness's story, though, and I hoped he would continue, as everything he said had sounded far-fetched to me. The Night Watchers were tasked with protecting the United States of America from all the things that go bump in the night: werewolves, zombies, vampires, and the like. Werewolves? I blurted. Zombies? Okay, yeah, I know. I'm a vampire, but still. Ness ignored me, and Christian continued to slouch in his chair, clearly unimpressed. Of course, none of this is actually news to you, Ness continued, since I know that you are already a member of the Night Watchers, Agent Wright. You and Agent Truesdale were ordered to investigate the possibility of vampires being in Chicago, especially among the gangs, and to take out any that you found. You'd only had one promising lead, Saul's former girlfriend, until you learned of something much more frightening. Ness paused, waiting for Christian to chime in. Christian sat silently for a moment, chewing on his lower lip. Finally he sighed and said, "We learned that Al Capone might be a vampire." "Because of Saul," Ness said flatly, as a statement of fact. Christian reluctantly nodded. "Yes, because of Saul. In case you didn't know, Capone is back in Florida right now. Nobody in Chicago knows that he was actually here then, or that he'd even left Florida at all in the past month. The federal prosecutor's office is trying to get Capone back here to give testimony for something, but Capone's doctors say that he's been laid up with an illness. Of course, you saw Capone last week on the Michigan Avenue Bridge, when you had Saul confront him for you. You'd lured him there, promising to give him some financial books." "That was Truesdale's idea," Christian admitted, giving me an apologetic look. "He'd hoped that we could take Capone down with a silvered bullet while he was distracted by dealing with Saul." "Really? You sure took your time taking that shot." Christian glared at me. "We weren't even sure that it would work. Vampires can die, but they have to bleed out before their wounds can heal. A stake through the heart, cutting off the head, or a whole slew of bullets will do the trick, but we only had one surplus M1 rifle. Silver works against werewolves and their ilk, so we had hoped that it might also work to slow down a vampire's healing ability." "So I was your guinea pig to bait Capone?" "Yes," Christian said, not at all embarrassed by the fact. He'd do it again if he got the chance. Ness held up his hand to me. To Christian he said, "Capone is a vampire, and he's still out there. Please, I need you to help me take him down." Christian rubbed his chin again and looked past Ness, clearly considering the request. If he said no, it wouldn't have mattered all that much to Ness. He would be able to find somebody else to put on his task force. It was at that moment that I realized that Christian was my only real link to my past. He was the only person, besides Ness, who knew who I was before I became a vampire. Ness had told me that I couldn't see my parents or my sister, that I couldn't go back to my job at the post office, and that I couldn't have any contact whatsoever with any of the people that I knew from before my death. To the world, Saul Imbirowitz was dead, so having any connection to my former life seemed important to me all of a sudden. "Please, Christian," I began. He looked at me, jaw clenched, and eyes narrowed. "I may have become a monster, but I didn't ask for it. I'm just as scared and angry by what happened as you are, and I could use your help." "Help? What help? Who else but you knows anything about vampires and what they can do? Who else but you can make sure that I don't get out of control? Besides, I think you want to get Capone, not just because he's a monster, because of what he did to you and to Agent Truesdale. I want to get Capone just as badly. Help us stop him." Ness and I both watched Christian expectantly. He pulled out a silver cross from a chain around his neck and thoughtfully rubbed it a couple of times, then looked up at Ness and sighed. "Fine. I'll join your task force." He turned to look at me. "But I still think that you are an abomination against God. I'd rather destroy you than work with you. But if it means getting Capone, then I'll do it." He pointed a finger at me. "Just remember, I'm not your friend. I don't want anything to do with you outside of work." I was a bit taken aback, but if it meant that he would come on the team to work with us, I'd live. "Ha! Funny." "Good," said Ness, standing up. He held out his hand to Christian. "I'm glad you've come on board. Thank you for taking the time to listen to a short excerpt from our new novel. Untouchable will be released in March and is available for pre-order from your favorite indie bookstore, chain bookstore, or online at Kobo, Barnes & Noble, Apple Books, and even that little website called Amazon. You can find us on Facebook at Habinger Kissee Authors or at our website, habingerkissee.com, HABIGERKISSEE.com. Thank you again for taking the time, and we hope you enjoy our book.